So, hello everyone, and welcome to another session of Great Shouts Marketing and Growth Interviews. I'm Ed Davidson. I'm a fractional head of marketing and the host for these sessions. This series is all about marketing and growth and how a business evolves from moving from a startup to a scale up. And these are nice warts and all interviews with marketing leaders and business owners who've been through this process. And we hope it's really useful for CEOs and founders to get a best perspective from people who've been through this process. And today we've got Will Critchlow. So Will has founded and scaled and exited Distilled, the SEO agency. He also ran SearchPilot, the conference series, and built Distilled U as well, online training program. And now he's running SearchPilot, an SEO A/B testing tool. So Will, great to have you on and welcome.
Thank you. Yeah, pleasure.
Good stuff. So first question I normally kick things off with is a bit of a baseline is, how do you define when a startup moves to that kind of scale up phase?
I think the answer, and this gives away something of the stage I think we're at on that journey, which is I think we're punchline is we're right in the middle of that move from startup to scale up, is a lot around product market fit and the stages of going through that journey, and in particular going from trying to find anything that works, which is the startup stage, to trying to make the things that have that hint of working work more. And it'll be different in different kind of businesses. We're in enterprise software as a service, so we're selling fairly substantial contracts to typically quite large businesses, and that's not your kind of classic viral loop startup. If you're marketing to consumers or I guess very small businesses, those kinds of things, it can be, you can have a product where as you get that product market fit, that naturally leads to more success. And you have other kinds of products where the scale itself is the fit. So a social network or something where, as you scale and get more users, the actual thing becomes more valuable. We're in that thing where it sounds kind of quite capitalist, I guess, but probably am a capitalist, I suppose. So what we need to do is make money and then spend the money that we're making on more growth, which makes more money, which we can spend on more growth. And I think that's the loop, that's the growth engine that we're building. And I guess startup is trying to discover the bits of that can work, and scale up is fine-tuning the engine, making sure the engine actually works, putting the fuel in and joining all the dots. And we're somewhere right on that journey. So I really quite like the model of product market fit that goes, discovering very early product market fit is all about those getting something that anybody will pay for. And then we're kind of trying to move from stage 2 to 3, where 2 is, you've got you've got a number of customers who are unaffiliated to you, who are happily paying for the product, who are renewing, who are, you are winning new business. It's just not necessarily scaling automatically and kind of being grabbed out of your hands. That's like stage 3. And so we're trying to move from that 2 to 3. So we're just right on that cusp, I think.
Right, it's exciting being there, right? And then getting to that stage and then pulling the trigger. Well, in terms of the kind of KPIs that you're measuring at that kind of startup phase, obviously the product market fit, those kind of early adopters. Do those KPIs, do you think, change over time as you're moving through that kind of phase 3 to maybe to phase 4?
So actually, I think, I don't know, maybe I don't know how controversial this is. I kind of feel like in the early stages, there aren't a ton of KPIs, or at least you're not kind of running off a dashboard of, is this number X% better than it was last month? Just because you're hunting for anything, frankly, you're trying to get that one sale, that one customer. It's not really measurable in classic KPI terms. Where we are now is we do have those dashboards. And so we're just, I think, in the process of moving to really running the business through the dashboards, rather than the end of the last stage was just starting to have enough data that we could measure it. And whether that's lead volume, number of deals, close win rates, expansion rates, net revenue retention, all those kind of classic metrics, we now just about have those metrics in ways that are somewhat consistent and stable. And we're just on that cusp of moving to actually running the business through those metrics. Which ones are where we want them to be, which ones are not. do we have a plan to fix the ones that are not? And do we have a plan to really maximize the wins from the ones that are already green?
And I suppose in those early stages, it's more qual feedback, right, than any quant metrics. It's getting
Definitely. Or
information.
where it is quantitative, it's kind of quite binary. It's like, did we win that deal? Is obviously a quant thing, but it's not like this percentage has gone from 7.3 to 8.2. It's like
Yeah.
0 to 1.
Yeah. And you mentioned those kind of those early adopters of, the product in your case there. And they've got a clear potential pain point. As you go slightly wider than those early adopters, does the messaging change over time from what you initially kind of said to when you then start kind of scaling up?
I mean, in our case, it definitely has. I can't speak to the general case, although, as you mentioned, I've built businesses before. This is my first software business. And one of the things that I'm quite enjoying about that is in a product business, we can be more mission driven and we can do more about that kind of positioning, it feels like. Whereas in agency world, the agencies are wonderful first businesses. It's the way I've been describing it. You can get an agency off the ground, as we did at 25, with no capital. You can bootstrap, you can get going, you can be profitable early on, but on small amounts, obviously. But I always found I never quite cracked that nut of having the mission driven culture in the agency world. We found it very hard to get beyond, well, our job is to make our clients happy and do what our clients want from us. And I mean, I'm very interested if your listeners have different experiences. I haven't actually come across really a professional services firm that's done that brilliantly well. You think about what's the mission of Accenture or a large law firm or McKinsey. I'm sure they have a mission statement somewhere, but really their job is win clients, make them happy, charge them a lot of money. That's kind of what it boils down to, it feels like. Anyway, this is a long way around to answer the question. Yes, our positioning has changed. In the early days, we very much sold a technical product to practitioners. So we obviously had to get the budget signed off and get the organization to make the decision. So, we had to go to senior people somewhere in the process, but it would often happen quite late in the process. We'd have already won over the SEO team. The SEO team would want it. The head of SEO would want it. And then the pitch to to somebody to say, can you give us this money? What we're increasingly, I want to say certainly trying to do, is solve more like business problems. So I've actually just recently been doing a lot of customer interviews where I've gone to the most senior stakeholder that we've met during the process for some recently won deals, so some new customers, and said, okay, now the dust has settled and the contract is signed and we're not quite so much playing the game anymore, negotiations are done. Can you tell us, why did you really buy SearchPilot? Why was this a problem you felt you had to solve? Why did you choose us, etc.? And it's probably not that surprising, but it wasn't particularly aligned with our messaging, that quite often the answer was, well, either organic search traffic is down, or there is a gap, or it's not as good as we want it to be, right? There's a gap between forecast and target, or actually it's going great, and this is the time where we're ramping up investment and we want to see even greater performance from the channel. And those sound like different things, but actually they're all channel performance. And what we had been kind of selling was channel insights, channel knowledge, channel capabilities. And what I think we really need to sell, and actually what we have a ton of customer stories around, a ton of success doing, is results, which sounds stupid. Like, it sounds so obvious, but that's what the P&L holders care about. And having more conversations with folks who hold that P&L, whether they're head of e-commerce, VP of digital, it tends to be those kind of job titles where that kind of discussion is more resonant and is landing a bit better.
And I think you've moved from that kind of those startup stages to scale up stages. Presumably you've got quantifiable results and strong case studies to really help to persuade them that messaging. Do you think
Yes,
that really helps in a kind of B2B context?
it definitely does. But it helps more with those more senior buyers who have the real business pain points. I think our journey is, over the last, I'm trying to remember when it would have been, probably 18 months ago, we had a really big focus on essentially documenting and producing the collateral around these stories that did exist, right? So we'd got some good results for customers, but we didn't really have the thing, you know, whether it's the one pager or the web page about it or the landing page or the story kind of signed off and agreed, you know, what can we say publicly, which numbers can we include the brand we were, you know, all those kinds of operational details. So we had a big push on that, say 18 months ago. And we do have some of those things. We won an award jointly with Skyscanner for our work with them kind of through the pandemic and coming out the other side. They actually stuck with us, tested throughout the whole pandemic. They continued with that. They were so going into the pandemic, 3 of our 5 biggest customers were in travel. And of those 3, one of the brands no longer exists. One cut its investment to 0 across the board. And Skyscanner was the one that stuck with us. And we had this great case study of they recovered faster and to a higher level than the travel industry as a whole. Not just because they worked with us, but because they had that plan of continuing to invest. And anyway, so we had these great stories. I feel like it then has taken us another at least 6 months to really realize that those stories don't necessarily resonate with the practitioners. You know, the head of SEO at some other organization kind of looks at that and eyes glaze over a little bit, whereas it does resonate with the budget holder. But we didn't really have access to that, or we weren't very good at getting access to them. And so that's been this journey for us kind of recently. We have another great one coming soon that isn't signed off yet, so I can't talk about it, but massive retailer with incredible results and very quickly as well. So in the first kind of quarter of working together. And I already have prospects and contacts and people who've said they know we're working with this organization. They said, like, as soon as you've got some results to tell me, I'm going to be very interested to hear that. And I'm like, well, it's coming soon. This is now obviously top priority to write this up. Now we've got the results. Let's get that written up and signed off and agreed.
And particularly, I imagine you've got a lot of data there. It could be anonymized data to be able to show results and build reports and be a kind of thought leader. Whereas you can't do that at the early stages. You kind of prove the worth of the product overall. Are you leveraging that now, or is that in the plans?
So I think we've done that better. Again, we've done it better on the practitioner side. So we have a lot of data showing how quickly we can drive, what's the word, like learning things, right? So the kind of, you're sitting there as a SEO practitioner for a very large website, and it's been shocking to me actually how few of them, or how much they struggle with answering a question like, if you were given more budget, right? If the organization turned around to you tomorrow and said, here's £250,000, £500,000, £1 million, what would you do to drive better results for your channel? And you ask that to a paid media team, and they'll have 10 million of pitch for you, right? in half an hour.
Yeah.
It's been quite surprising to hear that there's quite a lot of shrugging of shoulders, and that we're not really sure. Maybe we'd have some ideas. And our big bet, I think it's probably fair to say, is if you can build out an experimentation program. So not just we run the odd test here and there, but we have a structured program, and we're actually measuring the KPIs of the program, not just the individual test results. So obviously, it's a precursor to that is you have to be able to run an individual test. But the next level up the maturity curve is you're measuring the KPIs of the program. So you're measuring test cadence. How many tests do we run a quarter? You're measuring win rate. You're measuring those kinds of metrics. Once you've got that in place, you start to be able to say, okay, this program has so far delivered X million in incremental revenue. Give us more budget and we can run more tests, and that will deliver Y million more in incremental revenue. And that sounds obvious and straightforward to anybody who's in a kind of paid media world, but I think has been really missing in the organic search industry and channel. And so, yeah, we're kind of getting better at it. I would say we've been better at kind of answering the question for practitioners of hey, is this specific tactic a good idea or not? Is this idea going to work for you? Or even generating a list of ideas that might work for you. What we haven't done as well is tell the story of folks who build experimentation programs grow faster than their peers. And that's the kind of big strategic play for us, I guess.
Makes sense. Makes sense. And in terms of channels for SearchPilot, as you've gone from that kind of early stage to maybe kind of like expanding now, how have those channels worked for you? Is there, one particular channel that is overarching, been better and higher performance, or is it going to be a mix of channels for you?
I think one of the challenges as you go on that journey that I was talking about right at the beginning of the early hint of product market fit to kind of maturing on that journey is the stuff you do in the early days, kind of by its nature, isn't really a channel. It's just like this odd thing that happens to what you win one customer because you wrote a really good LinkedIn post, and 12 months later they show up in your pipeline and they're like, I've subscribed to your email ever since that thing that you wrote, and now we want to be a customer, and etc. And you can't attribute that doesn't mean that's a channel that is going to work for you or is going to scale or whatever. So we're we're not as far down the curve of discovering which channels are going to truly scale for us, but I can definitely talk about some of the things that have been working. So we got some early traction on all forms of kind of content marketing in the broadest sense. So whether that's writing, speaking, doing things like this, probably more focused on our target market, whether it's attending and speaking at conferences, all of that kind of thing. And partly that's because I think that channel is good for the long run, but partly it's also that was the quickest one to get running because of our, I guess, founder market fit. I myself and a bunch of the senior team have been in this industry for a long time. In my case, almost 20 years. In some of the team's case, a decade plus. And some of those early sales were a lot about us going to our network and not necessarily selling specifically to people we already knew, but certainly being able to open doors in ways that were because we've been around the industry that long. That's obviously not scalable. What's been working moderately well for generating leads is all kinds of extensions of that. So whether it's LinkedIn advertising promoting our content, whether it's paid media partnerships, so kind of doing sponsored co-sponsored webinars, that anything kind of gated with some budget behind it has been definitely generating leads. It's quite a slow journey to get from that, such a cold lead, right? Somebody who's only just heard of you to a paying customer, but lots of good signs in there. But actually, probably the most interesting one to talk about is our most recent, I guess, high point has been moving from a lot of presence and visibility at SEO conferences, of which there are a ton, and we know them very well. And I mean, we used to run one. And in fact, that brand has been bought by folks we also know. And so we sponsored our own events, essentially, and those that have come after that. The problem with that is twofold. One is every other vendor there is an SEO vendor. Pretty much. I mean, you get the occasional like project management platform or whatever, but like most people there are SEO vendors. And the attendees are all practitioners. They're all people with SEO something job titles, right? SEO manager, SEO executive, head of SEO, whatever. And what we've been trying to do is break out of that. And so e-tail recently was an example, and there's a ton of these in e-commerce, digital retail, travel, our kind of core spaces. And we need to expand this into jobs, real estate, local. There's a bunch of kind of verticals that work very well for us. But e-tail as an example, we were the only SEO vendor in a sea of AI solutions for various different things, right? It was like AI for this, AI for that. And somebody was like, oh, you're interesting and different. So that was easier to strike up those conversations. And secondly, the folks that we're meeting there are heads of digital, heads of e-commerce, VP of this, director of that. And it was just a very, very different kind of conversation. And so they've kind of, a lot of them have skipped straight to the SQL stage rather than being an MQL, because we're already starting to have that conversation with somebody who's actually interested in, or has a burning problem and wants help solving it. And so I think in person is beneficial there. we're going to experiment with some digital ones and virtual ones, but in person is beneficial. Getting to our target verticals own events, so whether that be travel, e-commerce, retail, whatever, and making it so that those are events that senior folks or senior enough folks are at, and they don't necessarily need to be the ultimate executive sponsor, but certainly people who are accountable for not stuff that's denominated in money rather than in tech.
And I suppose it's interesting that kind of view of going either kind of top down and bottom up, right? In terms of the test the power of the practitioner, because
Yep.
they want the piece of kit that's going to improve the situation versus the budget holder, because the budget holder might say be dictatorial or say to the practitioner you should use this, but there might be a lot of friction. So I suppose it's
So
just finding that
we've
right.
got all these journeys to go on as we find out how these conversations pan out. My hope and the optimistic version of this is so that there are definitely some teams where the practitioners are resistant to what we do. And I don't want to just say it's the bad teams, but if more accountability is going to be a bad thing for your career, then whereas there are a lot of teams we speak to, practitioners who are very, very keen to have this kind of capability because the accountability is going to be great for their careers because they're going to be able to prove the results that they're getting. They're going to be able to demonstrate it to the business. They're going to get more budget, more visibility, more kudos, their own things they can put on LinkedIn and whatever. And so there isn't a lot of resistance from good operational teams. They actually really like it. And I also think that the best leaders aren't probably dictatorial in the way that you described. They are the ones who go to those teams and say, either here's a problem, how would you solve it? Or here's a problem and here's a potential solution. What do you think? Who might we work with or whatever? The point being, for us, I think we do need to win over the practitioners. I don't think we're going to make sales where it's forced upon the practitioners. But historically, that's been the easy bit for us. The easy bit has been getting people excited about it. The harder bit has been getting the organization to prioritize it and do it. And that's where you need somebody senior enough to go, no, this is a burning problem. And this is a solution to our burning problem. And I am perfectly happy to put that amount of budget into solving my burning problem. And if there are other blockers in the business that are getting in the way, then let's sit down and have a meeting with them because I want to remove those blockers from this project. And those are all the skills of a leader and executive.
Where, in terms of how you're promoting, where does the brand fit in that? Bearing in mind, direct response activity or demand capture rather than demand generation, or expectations on cost per MQL, clear attributed kind of benefit versus building a movement and a brand that's going to have a benefit overall. Where have you kind of seen that in the journey so far?
I would say that we spend the vast majority of our measurement effort and scaling effort on the direct response stuff. We haven't made any attempt to measure brand. We haven't made any attempt to really allocate more budget to brand building. I think that's quite likely to come in the next stage, right? As we move, if we can prove that some of these bits of the engine are working and we move truly to scale up, then that's, I think, when you can start saying, actually, all this stuff comes together into more measurable things. Having said that, I think where we started, both pre-SearchPilot, like however many years of agency work in the industry, followed by the content marketing and that side of things, has built a certain brand. And yes, some of it is personal brand, some of it is blended with Distilled, the agency brand. It's not a simple clear-cut thing, but there's a lot of pros and cons to being essentially category creators. There is not a ton of competition. There's not a ton of specialists focusing on just exactly what we do. I think one of the benefits is we are as close to synonymous in a very early stage category creation as we could reasonably hope to be, considering it hasn't been a major focus, right? We haven't done a ton of PR. We haven't done a ton of brand spend. Our adverts tend to be LinkedIn direct response stuff, not YouTube brand, or we certainly haven't taken over the tube yet.
I suppose it was interesting about that kind of category creation as well is how much you build a movement, right? There's a
Mm,
category in terms of what the product creates, but it's also a
definitely.
movement that this is the bad place that used to be, this is a new place, get on board
Mm.
in that movement. And I think if you can get that to sing as well, then that's even more of a kind of resonance to people.
I mean, it's certainly a path to success, isn't it? You think about, say, the HubSpot inbound
Mhm.
movement was probably for me, the defining example of that, just because I kind of lived through it. That was quite disruptive to the SEO industry in quite a good way, but kind of positive disruption to the SEO industry through the 2010 to 2018 era or something. I don't know what the dates are exactly, coupled with the fact that we actually happen to know those folks. So Dharmesh, the CTO and founder at HubSpot, actually spoke at SearchLove years and years
Right.
ago, over a decade
Right.
ago, I think. And I'm a huge fan of what they built. I mean, we're customers, and I'm also a fan of, as I like to tell my daughter, who's a big Taylor Swift fan. I'm a massive fan of Taylor Swift's business model, and I think she's an incredible businesswoman. And I think I have a similar respect for the HubSpot team in the sense of just, every time you go to something, you're like, the thing I really, really want this software to do is X, and they're like, oh yeah, it absolutely does X on the next plan up, and you're like, oh crap, I'm gonna have to press the upgrade button, aren't I? And you don't even
Nice
resent it. You're like,
lathering.
yeah, Darmash, would you like some more of our money because you've got a thing that we really, really want? So I'm a huge fan of that. We haven't gone all in on that, and I know what that looks like, right? It's write the book, run the conference, do all those things. We haven't done that, and maybe it is an opportunity. It I haven't quite figured out a way in my own head to make that essentially more than a blog post. How to really properly make it disruptive and interesting and innovative. I think maybe it could emerge as the next iteration off the back of some of these results. If you start telling the story of Skyscanner did this and retail brand X did this, and actually you start from the customer stories, then maybe that takes us to somewhere interesting. Uh, but yeah, no, at the moment I haven't lent fully into that. So we've got a bit of it around the edges of our content marketing and our personal brands and so forth, but no, nothing that I could truly describe as a movement.
Look, I suppose the closest thing that I've kind of seen in the kind of SEO agency is obviously the Moz world, right? In terms of what
Yep.
Rand had with his community, right? And then
Hmm.
that I'm sure just had so much kind of a bearing of view of people using Moz, even if potentially it was inferior to other products, right? But
I 100% expect that Moz has a significant number of customers still today, a decade after Rand left the business. Is it? I can't remember the timelines. Certainly a decade after he stepped down as CEO, and what, 15 years from the kind of, yeah, that insane growth era. I mean, that was incredible for us as well. We definitely rode that wave. We partnered with Moz back in the day. It was a big part of
yeah.
Distilled's growth. It's why we ended up running operations in the US. And um, I mean, I met a lot of lifelong friends actually in the Moz blog comments, which sounds is one of those weird sentences that you don't expect to trot out at parties. But
Did you host any whiteboard Fridays? I suppose that's the
I've
ultimate.
hosted a number of Whitewood Fridays. There's some
Oh, there
quite
you go.
embarrassing, very old ones that folks can probably dig out. In fact, I recorded a new one recently. I went into London and did that in their studio. That must be coming out soon. I don't know, I need to check on that actually. But yes, that community is not what it used to be for a variety of reasons. And there's nowhere quite like that. There's no, to my knowledge, no central forum, everything fragmented to the different social media platforms. And there's some Slack groups, there's some WhatsApp groups, there's those kind, but there's no, it doesn't feel like there's the kind of Schelling point of like everyone is here in the
Mm,
way that the Moz community absolutely was that in
mm,
2007 or something. I don't think that exists today. And we have thought about, should we try and build it? But we're too niche, I think. Moz could do that because they were whole of the SEO industry. Whereas could SEO testing support that? I'm skeptical. And if it's not as narrow as SEO testing, we're not really credible as the host in a way. And so yeah, definitely still navigating the thinking on that one.
Makes sense. Just briefly then, just because we're nearly out of time, just talking about team and the way kind of teams operate within SearchPilot. So from your kind of early days to now starting to scale up, or when you saw that at Distilled, what's the kind of most important kind of recommendations for again from a startup to a scale up? You mentioned culture there briefly, but yeah, it'd be interesting to hear how get teams working together as you scale.
Definitely. So Distilled was my first entrepreneurial. Well, I mean, like a lot of founders, I'd done the lemonade stand equivalent, whether it was the cricket coaching camp we ran, or the lots of stories we can tell about the 90s. But it was the first real business that we'd run. I hadn't even managed anyone before founding Distilled at 25, so I made a lot of mistakes. And my apologies to those folks I line managed in the very early days. I like to describe myself in SearchPilot as a 1.5 time founder. It's not quite a 2 time founder because it spun out Distilled. So we kind of inherited a lot of the culture and values of the agency, but it also isn't the same business. It is a new business, and we have been able to put in place a mission and put in place our values and those kinds of things. So I think in terms of advice, I think there's 2 things. One is that kind of piece is really important really early on. And I wish we'd done that sooner in Distilled, is having the mission, having the values, repeating them all the time, tying everything to them, tying all your numbers, all your KPIs, every reason why you make every decision has to be mission and values. And I'm genuinely trying to do it so much that the team not only can repeat it back to you, but can is probably bored of hearing me talk about it. The other piece is which we have actually tried to bake into our values quite a lot, but is how to kind of operationalize great teams. And I'm a big fan. I wish I'd read earlier in my career the book 5 Dysfunctions of a Team by Patrick Lencioni, which works even better when you have the mission and values defined, because it's basically all around how to build teams that align. And that was failing to do that was the source of some of the most painful years of my working life, where we had folks just pulling in different directions, not even bad directions necessarily, but just not the same direction. And I couldn't work out how to fix that for too long in the agency era. And now I don't think I'm a particularly ruthless person. That's not quite, ruthless is the wrong word to use, but I would ruthlessly do whatever I could to avoid being in a situation of misalignment again, because it's just a lot less fun, and I think less successful, but more importantly less fun. And so 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. Final thought to leave you with that we've just been using a lot recently is, as the team scales, so we're at that classic scaling point where we're at 25 people now. I know from prior experience that 30 is, somebody said to me the other day, every time you cross a scaling point that starts with a 1 or a 3, everything changes in the culture, in the management vibe, whatever. And I know there's stuff coming, right? Internal haters, or people who aren't quite aligned with the mission, or like those kinds of things. They come at that point from 30 to 50. And I've been enjoying, is the wrong word, using the questions from a guy called Jerry Colonna. I don't know if you've come across his work. He does the Reboot. His business is called Reboot. So he hosts events and does podcasts and whatever. But he's a coach. He has these 4 questions. What am I saying that's not being heard? What is being said that I'm not hearing? What am I not saying that needs to be said? And the one that is the absolute gut punch: how am I complicit in creating the conditions that I say I don't want? And I hate that question, because if you answer it honestly and you're like, God damn it, I'm going to have to start working out, aren't I? And or that in your personal life, or what the equivalent in your working life is like, there's a thing that you need to do, and you're just not doing it, and somehow you have to figure out, like, come on, like let's be real here. This is actually blocking me from achieving the thing that I say I want. And so currently hating that. If that's
But
any
those
use to
4
anyone.
things are really useful, and also is great times, you say, those scaling phases, to then review where you've come from against all those points. So it's really interesting. Okay, we're at time. Thank you so much, Will. I suppose the final question that I always ask the guests here is, what's the kind of one best piece of advice you could recommend to founders or company owners going from that startup to scale up moment?
it's kind of a cliche, but I guess it's for a reason, is double down, do even more talking to customers. I think that was the absolute head smacking moment recently of half a dozen of those interviews that are people I know. I've talked to them, but going back to them and saying, no, but no, really, why did you work with us? Wasn't revelatory, but was focusing. I could have guessed their answers, but it wouldn't have had the power of saying, of just literally in black and white, here's what they said. So it's very easy at this stage, I think, to get distracted into the KPIs, live in spreadsheets, talk to your team, build the culture of the business, blah, blah, blah. And I slightly needed that kick up the arse to go and say, actually, no, I need to go back and continue spending time with customers.
Makes sense. Makes a lot of sense. Speak to those customers. Well, look, Will, I really appreciate it. Thanks so much for your time. And thanks, everyone. And see you again at the next session. Bye now.
Take care.